This is part 2 of a video showing how I changed out a load-bearing post and how I modified the foundation. If you want to see part 1 first, then click the appended link. Rather than taking the chance of tipping the wheelbarrow over and losing my grip, I'm just going to shovel it in. Putting more mesh in. I'm trying to keep it away from the edges because the mesh can rust and lead to problems internally. Well, they call this thing a stinger, and it's a giant vibrator like this. And what it does is it vibrates the concrete to get all the little air bubbles out, especially those against the sidewalls and against the metal structures down below. It improves the cosmetic appearance dramatically, and it improves the strength a little bit. Generally worth doing, especially on deeper concrete. And don't forget to clean off your tools. And then don't forget this thing here. A lot of guys will wait a little bit till it slightly hardens up before putting it in so it doesn't sink in too deep. And of course you gotta find your marks again because they may have disappeared underneath the concrete. An old school way of trying to ensure that you don't get honeycombing is to lightly tap on the forms. Of course you don't want to break anything, but that might provide enough vibration to get rid of some of the last bubbles. You notice also I've got that top brace on there. It had splayed out a little bit, but not enough to be a big issue. Okay, I waited a while, about a half an hour, before I laid this into place. And now I'm trying to give it a bit of a taper downward so any water that happens to hit here will roll off of the post and won't collect and be drawn up by capillary action into the wood. Well, when you do a project like this, the first thing you need to do is to decide how much volume you need. And the way I did that is I measured the volume in inches and then divided by 12 by 12 by 12, and that worked out to cubic feet. And how many cubic feet in a cubic yard? Yeah, that's right, 27. And so accounting for wastage, I figured I needed about 5 cubic feet, which is a real small volume. Now, in terms of options, I really had 2 options. The first would be a simple one, that's to buy the pre-mixed bags where the concrete and sand and gravel all mixed together in bags. And the convenient thing about that is that you can take the unused bags back. As long as you don't get them wet, you can take them back to most retailers and they'll return them, and so there's very little wastage. But the disadvantage is it's quite expensive to do it that way. So I chose to do the, I guess you'd say the old-fashioned way, is to buy my sand and gravel and concrete separately. And the sand and gravel cost me about $20 altogether. And the smallest volume they'd sell me when buying it that way is a quarter yard of sand and a quarter yard of gravel. And when the guy with the front end loader came by, I said, give me a little more gravel to sand so that my ratio is about right. Now you never want to be short when you do this kind of thing. And so you're inevitably going to end up with some leftover. And I'm going to be able to distribute this leftover material in about my garden and areas like that. But if you can't deal with the leftovers, spend the extra dollars and get the premixed. Okay, for the part of the post that's closest to the concrete and the ground and the moisture, I'm using this stuff called end cut preservative. Now my chop saw is not big enough to deal with this in one swipe, and so I've gone around it with a tri-square, put a mark, and now I'm going to use a skill saw to cut it off, and then use a handsaw to cut off the remainder inside. Now the trick is that these skill saws are not usually calibrated well enough for your purposes here, and so you need to calibrate it yourself. In this case, this skill saw is off by at least a 1/16 of an inch in terms of square. Well, this was the best 6x6 Douglas fir post they had at the lumber market, but you can see I got a few cracks here, and although it's plenty straight, I'm hoping I'll be able to get by with this. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to notch out the fir post so that I get support on the 2 levels without having to put that extra piece in that the previous carpenters did. The method they used is quicker and faster, but not as strong. So let's see if we can do it. We're going to notch this out here and see if we can get it right without it falling apart with these cracks. Of course, a pro would not necessarily consider this to be worth his time, but as an amateur homeowner, I see things from a different perspective. Well, without putting any weight on the green foundation, I've dry fit the post and it fits pretty good. Now I'm going to paint it here because I'll be able to get the paint into areas that I wouldn't be able to get it to once it's installed. That'll give me an extra day for the green foundation to harden up, because it takes many days for that foundation to come to full strength. One thing the previous homeowner did really well is he kept the old paint cans. That made it a snap to match up the paint. Even if you use up the whole gallon, make sure you keep the lids for future reference. We're up in this top section now, and I'm directing your attention to this little space here. You probably noticed a lot of bird crap on the post when we took it out, and that's because in the rain, birds like to perch up in here. And so I don't particularly like cleaning off the post all the time, and so I've created this little spacer to go in this area and prevent birds from perching here so I can keep my post cleaner. Now, for those who don't know it, when you cut little parts like this, make the long cut the last cut. And the reason for that is you need something for your safety. Cutting little pieces like this is inherently dangerous. So make the long cut the last cut. If you cut it too long, throw it out and start again. Well, we're taking the forms off today, and as expected, the front form just popped off after I unscrewed it. But the problem I'm having is on the side forms, and I have to say I also expected that. Because my fit wasn't all that great in behind here, I had concrete spill over, and so now concrete is encasing part of my form. Now, ideally you'd like to get as much of this form out as possible because it's nutrient for wood-boring insects, and I don't want to create a nest here. But I'm not willing to break concrete to do it, and so I'm going to use a tool to score this wood. You can't just use a simple saw or a skill saw, there's not enough room. And so I'm going to use this tool, this Multimaster tool, which is a neat device. Now the history of this device is also interesting. It was initially used in the medical industry. At one time it was, or in fact is still used to open up the skull so you can get into the brain. And the important thing about it is it doesn't damage underlying soft tissue. You can actually touch it while it's running and it won't damage your hand. It's also used to take off casts for the same reasons. But we're going to use it here because of the interesting properties of space limitation. Well, now that the forms are off, I'd say this looks pretty good. A couple of very minor areas of honeycombing. Interestingly enough, the worst honeycombing is right here at the edge on both sides. And I think that's an effect of the stinger. When I put the stinger on, I noticed it was getting a lot of liquid leakage out here, and so my concrete ratio was abnormal in this area, and it led to this honeycombing. But it's nowhere near a serious effect, and overall I'd say I'm happy with the result. Right now I'm going to wet this down one more time, and it is noteworthy that green concrete like this is nowhere near its full potential. And you actually have to wait a full month before it reaches full potential, and so it's curing all the time. I haven't put any weight on it yet, and I think I'll leave it another day or two before I do that. Here we are in the upper floor deck. It may be tempting to jack the floor up a little when you put in the new post to compensate for a loss in height that might have occurred as the post rotted out. But just remember a critically important point. When it's all finished, you need to maintain that downsloping angle to the upper floor deck so that rainwater will be pulled away from the house. Well, I waited for 5 days, and given the minimal load that's on this, the concrete should be good and ready. Overall, I'd say I'm happy with the result. One other thing I should show you here is this bit. A friend of mine who's a building inspector always told me that I should put a shingle underneath posts, and that does two things. One, rainwater that drips down the side here tends to deflect away, and two, it raises it just a little bit, enough to take away some of those osmotic forces that draw fluid up into the wood. Say, if this video helped you out and you want to see more of them, then hit like or subscribe or leave a comment. I'd love to hear what others say. Thanks for watching.